Welcome to the third video in our series introducing the GIS Mesher and how to use it. The GIS Mesher is a new application that's set up to be able to enable you to build quality meshes quickly using your favorite GIS software. This is the third video again. In the first video we learned how to set up a project and we created a simple mesh. And in the second video we went through and learned some of the commands that we can use to help control the cell sizes and be able to align the cells with features, especially linear features such as channels and roadways. And then in this video, we're going to learn how we can add associated data to the mesh. So we're going to talk about elevation data and how we can define that, how we define materials that are used to define the surface roughness, which would be associated with the Manning's N value typically. And then also learn how to define node strings. Node strings are used for boundary conditions and also to measure flux across the line or other things where we want to be able to identify a linear feature. So let's go ahead and get started. So just as before, we have our QGIS window set up. Really quick, I'm going to come in and reverse my color amp so that my colors go blue to red being high. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go through and look at elevation data. So we're going to come in and we're going to create a new project. I'm going to call this tutorial 003. And we're going to come along and find the elevation section. And the first command in here is to set the z-point elevation. This is going to affect the whole mesh initially, and then we'll override it with local values. So if something doesn't get assigned, it's going to end up with an elevation of 80 meters. And then we want to be able to feed in the DEM and give it the DEM values. So to be able to do that, we're going to copy the DEM over to this folder. We could just reference it from another place, but I'm going to go ahead and copy it for our purposes. And I'm going to just stick it right there. So this, when we created the project, it created this little stub for us, read GIS points, and I'm going to replace the file name with DEM, and this is DEM-m01.img. The command can use a number of different raster formats. It can do TIFFs. In this case, it's an IMG format. There are a bunch of other formats that can be used along with it as well. So that's going to read in those elevations. Now, if we zoom in and look like at the area of these bridges, we can see that the bridges the bridges are overriding the elevations in the channel areas. So it means that we are not getting. I'm going to turn off the hill shade for just a minute so you can see it a little better. So we can see that the channel gets broken up by the bridge. Now for what we're going to be doing for our hydraulic modeling, we want to represent the channel through there. We don't want the bridge blocking the channel. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a layer that's going to have polygons that's going to enforce the Z values through those areas. And so we come over to our GIS Mesher GUI that we use to create GIS files, and we're going to tell it we're going to do a Z polyline or Z poly layer. And I'm just going to call this Z poly bridges. And I'll give it version 003. And I create that file. You see it created down here in our log. We can come over here into the GIS folder and we can see that we got the Z poly bridges brought in. I'm going to bring it up here, and so we want to get it set up. So I'm going to make it editable, and I'm going to click out a polygon here. and we're going to make the elevation 45 for a second. Let's look and see with our DM active what the elevations are around there. So that's in that 44. So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. Select that. I'm going to make that. Let's see, information. Make that elevation. I'm going to go to edit feature form, and I'm going to change that to 44. Okay. Now there's another bridge we need to do the same thing for. Up here, this elevation of the DM in this area is, let's say 37.5. It's roughly where we want it. I'm going to deselect that. Let's create another polygon in here. And this is, we're going to go 37.5. So that's going to set the elevation for everything inside of that polygon to 37.5. And then I saved it. Now in our meshing control file, we're going to come in here and do the read GIS Z poly, and we're going to change the name in here to be GIS Z poly bridges 003.php. Okay, now we have, that's going to override the elevations within that polygon. We can use a min or a max command, some other things there. We're just going to go ahead and overwrite everything that's under there with that elevation. One thing to note when we do elevations, when we assign the elevations, they get assigned to the nodes and the cells. And for TUFLOW-FV, we write this. We have this command in here by default where we write the FV cell elevation file. So in our output folder, following the name of our control file, we'll have a cell elevations.csv file. That will be a cell by cell file that will have the elevations of the elements for the cells written for TUFLOW-FV to use. So you can use cell by cell elevations rather than interpolate from the nodes. So next we'll move on. So that's going to be elevations, and we'll look at that when we complete the mesh. We'll go back and make sure that those get assigned the way we expected. The next thing to do is materials. So materials, we've got some materials data that rather than digitize it, we've got it already set up. So I'm going to copy this over into my meshing area. And what this is some names of materials and a file that defines those. So if we go to our properties and say we're going to do these categorized based on the material and classify them, then we can turn off our other things for a minute. We can see the different materials, and so we can see that we've identified that pasture number 1 is going to be the default. We're going to have the roads we can see are 2, buildings 3, ponds and other waters 4, and then the vegetated creek is 10. So those are kind of the numberings and the materials that we've got in there. So in our meshing control file, we've already set the material by default to be equal to 1, and then we want to override materials using this read GIS materials, and in here we put in a file name GIS materials 001.shp. Now in this case we can have any number of these read GIS materials files. So if you have different scenarios proposed, proposed, or alternatives, different alternatives that you want to have different material settings for, you can start with kind of a base layer and then create more layers to override specific areas as needed. Okay, so that's all there is to it, to set up those materials, since we didn't have to digitize them. And now we'll go ahead and do node strings. So node strings, we're going to go ahead and digitize these. So we need a layer. So we're going to come over to our GIS Mesher GUI that helps us to create creates our GIS files. And I'm going to create one called node strings 003. And I'm about to create the file, and it shows that it created it. And so we come over, wrong one, and we go to node string 003 and bring it in. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off for a minute, and I'm going to turn my boundary back on, and we're going to create a couple node strings. So I'm going to create a node string at our inflow boundary. So I'm going to leave the ID to be null. That's going to have it named automatically. And I'm going to tell it that it has to be an external node string, and I'm going to give it a name. The name will just be upstream. And then I'm going to create one at the downstream boundary. And that one I'm just going to change to downstream. I also want it to be external. We want it to force it to follow the cells along the edge. And then I'm going to create some that would use to monitoring flows as they cross these roads. So I'm going to just click out one that kind of follows this roadway. And I'm going to delete the external. That's going to be, make it to be external as false. And I'm going to give it the name road 1. And then I'm going to come up and create another one for this road. And it's also not going to be external, and it's going to be assigned road 2. And then I save my changes, make it uneditable. And then in my meshing control file, I come in, the template left me a placeholder for the read GIS node strings command, and I just simply come in here and put in GIS node strings 003.shp. And that should be all there is to it. Now let's go ahead and go over to our GUI, switch over to the Run Mesher, select our new meshing control file and tell it to run. And it'll take a little bit more time maybe than it's taken before to run, because we've got a few more steps to do. It's going to first off create the mesh like it did before, using the same sizes and polylines to enforce edges and cell sizes, and then it's going to go through, assign elevations and materials, and create node strings, and then output it to those files. And so altogether it did all of that, and it took 30 seconds. And now we can go and check out the results. So if we go to our output folder and we find tutorial 3 and we bring it in, go to properties, and I'm going to say let's look at the elevation. So we're going to do a graduated color ramp Z, and I'm going to do my favorite red blue, and I'm going to classify those. I want my blues to be on lower, so I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to make a whole bunch of colors there. Click OK. I'm going to turn off my DEM so we can see that it's not the DEM. We see the elevations coming through. We can go down near the bridges and see that our channel is not interrupted by those bridges. So it looks like those are assigned correctly. The other things we can check, so we can go back in, look at change our properties, and instead let's look at our material. So that's a category. And we'll go click on classify, click OK, and we can see that most things, let's look at flow. We got lots of cell IDs. A lot of them got assigned a cell of 1, cell ID 1. Our roads got a material, oops, zoom in here a little tighter, a material ID of 2. Hopefully that's, yep, that's what we said we wanted to have. So okay, so our materials got set up, and we can check to make sure that the node strings that we wanted get assigned. Output, there's a tutorial 3 node string layer. So if I turn off my other layer, we can see that in my boundary we got a node string there, upstream, downstream, road 1, road 2. So all of the layers got created as we would have expected. So all in all, we were able to create a mesh, or the mesh that we already had set up to create. We've added elevation data, materials information, and node strings really pretty easily using our GIS application, in this case QGIS or QGIS, however you're supposed to refer to it. Thank you for watching the videos. I hope that you're able to give the GIS mesher a try and that you find it useful and helpful in your work.